You're listening to Every Day's a Saturday USMC Veteran podcast.
Now introducing your host of Every Day's a Saturday USMC Veteran, the one-man show, Brian Roof.
Hey, what's going on, friends and family? Well, we made it, and it is the last interview of the season. Season 2 is about to be wrapped up. That is crazy. And we're going to end up with 105 interviews. That's in total from season 1 to season 2. That is quite outstanding. And then we'll get the season 3 going January 9th of 2025. I might as well just keep it going that way. We started on January 9th, so we'll just keep it going that way, I think, I'm excited for my next guest, and it is quite a crazy story. And I'm glad she's here to talk all about it and tell us about her experiences. She was kidnapped as a child and by her father and taken out of the country. And she's here to tell her story. I'm going to let her tell all about it. I don't want to go into it too deep because she's going to definitely do a lot better of it. But who here we have is Lauren Burns. How you doing?
I'm great, Brian. Thanks for having me on your show. And man, it's an honor to be able to be your last show and on Veterans Day. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. And you know what? I'm sure you're very, familiarized with telling your story, but I really appreciate you coming on to tell all my listeners about your story. It is quite a crazy story and very unique, and I'm glad you're here to talk all about it. So the floor is yours now, and please just, let us know all about you and your story.
So I started sharing about 6 months ago because, for your listeners that know what it's like to have that little whisper in your head and like, I'm supposed to be out there sharing. And for me, that whisper was God. He's like, all right, Lauren, it's your turn. You need to tell people what I did in your life and what the men did in my life. There's a movie made about my childhood, and it was done by NBC in 1993 called Desperate Rescue, the Cathy Mahone Story. Like you said, I was kidnapped by my biological father. My parents were divorced by the time I was 6 weeks old. And so my childhood was a hot mess, you could say, at a very young age. My parents met in the Dallas area. My father is from Jerash, Jordan, and he's Muslim. And my mom was a Christian from Florida, and they met in Dallas, Texas. And, when you're young and 19, 20, you're not thinking about the differences in your beliefs or any of that. You're just like, oh, he's cute. This could work.
Right.
But it didn't work. The only people my mom had in her life at that time was Rick and Beverly Lambert. And if you love country music, you know Miranda Lambert. Yes, the big country singer-songwriter. Well, before I was born or Miranda was born, Bev and Rick, her parents, were my mom's closest friends. And they all hung out together with my dad all the time. And when my mom became pregnant, all of a sudden, my dad, I guess, felt this responsibility to go back to his roots, if you say that way. And he told my mom that he needed to go to Jordan because his father was sick. And my mom thought nothing of it and was like, sure, go to Jordan, take care of your dad. Well, a couple weeks turned into 3 months that he was gone. And my mom at that point thought that she had been abandoned. There wasn't a lot of communication between the two of them. And because of all of that, she had me 6 weeks early. So there she was. She just had her friends by her side going to labor. And my dad came back and he looked different, Brian. He was dressed in like the traditional Jordanian clothing. And my mom was, you could imagine, angry and emotional. And he began to tell her that he went to Jordan to make a home for us. He had found a job. He had gotten a home. And she freaked out. She was like, we never discussed moving from Texas, let alone the United States. I don't want to move. This is not something we agreed upon. So by the time I was 6 weeks old, she was filing for divorce. And so there she was in her early 20s, a single mom with an infant. And she was actually working with Miranda's grandmother, Wanda. And Wanda had a good friend that said, hey, I'll help Cathy out. Her and her baby can move in with me. And so her name was Joyce, and she became my Aunt Joyce. My mom was trying to figure out how to pay for diapers and formula and all the things. But once they got situated, things became normal. I was the typical divorced kid going between my dad's house, my mom's house. They actually got along really well after all of that. My dad remarried to another woman that was from the Middle East, and they had children. And so now I was a big sister, and I had two little siblings, and life was good. Going back and forth between my mom working nonstop and going to my dad's house where it was more of a little bit of a family atmosphere. But everything changed when I turned 7. It was Halloween weekend. My dad asked my mom if he could have me for one extra night so I could go trick-or-treating with my siblings, and my mom thought, "Sure, no problem. As long as you get Lauren back to school for Monday. I don't want her to miss school." Typical mom, right? So he comes to my house, and Brian, as I've started sharing this story, I found a brown box that my mom had labeled Jordan with black marker on it. And when I opened that box, I found all the photos, all the journals my mom's written, actual cassette tape, phone recordings of everything that happened during my kidnapping. And I had a picture of myself. I was dressed like a little cheerleader, blue and yellow outfit with my hair in pigtails. And my dad had picked me up that day. And I was so proud of my uniform that I had on, my costume. And I got in the car, and it was just me and my dad. My siblings weren't there. My stepmom wasn't there. And I kissed my mom goodbye. And as I shut the car door, my dad looks at me and says, "I have a big surprise for you." And I'm like, "Yeah, I know. We're going to go trick or treating." And he said, "No, actually, we are going on a big trip. I'm taking you on a plane. We're going to Jordan to go see your family that you've never met." Well, I start asking all the questions. I'm like, "Wait, mom never told me about going on a trip. Is she okay with this? Where is my brother? Where's my sister? Where's my stepmom?" And as he's driving to the airport, I could sense that he was getting frustrated. The more questions I had, the more upset he would sort of get. And I just eventually stopped asking the questions. I just didn't want to keep making him mad because he really wasn't an angry kind of person. He was just getting frustrated. So that Monday, my mom goes to the school, which, if you're listening and you know what it's like to be a single parent, it's like unheard of to stop your day to go have lunch with your kid in the middle of the day because you got to work to pay the bills, right? But she actually went to school that Monday, and, call it whatever you want, but I call it the Holy Spirit just talking to my mom because she showed up that day, which was so out of her character. And she's standing in the courtyard of my school, and she's looking as the kids are lining up for lunch, and she doesn't see me. And the teacher spots my mom and walks over and was like, "Cathy, Lauren never came to school today." Well, my mom's mad because the last thing she said to my dad was make sure Lauren goes to school. So back in 1987 is when this happened. There were no cell phones. So she went to the closest payphone. And even though we lived a block around the corner, she dials his number to the house, and it rings and rings and rings and rings, and nobody answers. He owned a restaurant in the Dallas area, and she called the restaurant, and they told her Ollie never came to work that day. Well, that's when my mom knew. Her third phone call standing at that payphone was to the Alia Airlines. That back then, that's what it was called, the headquarters in New York. That was the main airlines that flew into Amman. She knew that because prior to them getting married, 9 years prior to this happening, she had gone to Jordan and to meet all of my dad's family. So again, it's like the Holy Spirit was just sort of guiding my mom and directing her what to do. So she calls, and the lady answers the phone, and she said, "Do you have a Lauren and an Ollie on your flight into Amman?" And the lady said, "Ma'am, I can't give out that kind of information." And then my mom's voice changed, and she said, "Please, I think my ex-husband has taken my daughter. Can you please help me?" So she put my mom on hold, and she finally came back online, and she said, "Yes, I have a Lauren and Ollie landing in Amman, Jordan this evening." Brian, that was the moment my mom knew that he had taken me, standing at that payphone. The fourth phone call she made from the payphone was to Rick Lambert. See, Rick Lambert was a police officer in the Dallas area. And at this time, he had actually stopped working as a police officer, and him and his wife, Beverly, opened a private investigation company called Lambert and Lambert.
Hmm.
So she paged Rick 911. And Rick and Beverly happened to be working together that day, and they were at the Dallas County courthouse. And when his pager went off 911, he went over to the clerk and asked to borrow the phone. And when my mom got on the phone, she began to tell Rick, Ollie's taken Lauren. So Rick looked at Beverly and said, we've got to go. We've got to meet Cathy right now. So they jumped in their car and they were driving like 90, 100 miles down the road, the Dallas Expressway, to meet my mom. And Brian, that's where everything started to unfold. You can imagine my mom's
Oh,
world crashing. Like,
yeah.
he never worked,
Helpless.
right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because there's, I mean, technically you're with your dad, right?
Right.
And that's the hard part too. And then now you're on a plane that's probably by the time she's going to get there is clearly in flight, and it's not going to turn around for anybody.
Right. Yeah. And it was so out of his character. I mean, no one ever imagined that he would have done this ever. Bev and Rick, my grandmother, like
How long
everybody.
lived in America prior to this already at this
I don't
point?
know how long he had lived here, because he had a brother that also lived in the Dallas area. That's why he came
Okay.
to, and he was going to college. So at least, I mean, they were married 4 years before they had me. So at least 9, 10 years, at
Mm,
least.
okay.
So there was like no warning, no red flags.
Right.
So so Rick started calling everybody he knew, whatever contacts he had, trying to search a way to get help. What do you do when a child has been abducted by their father, taken out of the United States? And Beverly starts to research all the laws, and she finds out during her research that in Jordan, when a child is at the age of 7, all rights go to the father. Well, my birthday is in September. He took me Halloween. So he was planning this all along, knowing what the laws were. And then my mom, and the first thing Rick told my mom is go to Radio Shack and get a recording device to put on your phone. So anytime you call the police or the State Department, you can remember what information they're giving you, because you can imagine where her head was. And anytime you call Jordan or try to get a hold of Ollie or any of his family, we can go back and listen for any kind of clues of where they might be. Well, because of that, Brian, I have all the cassette tapes and they all
Oh,
still
wow.
work, which is a miracle, because they've been in a garage in Texas, so you can imagine how hot it is. That was not smart of me, but, um, I've listened to all those cassette tape recordings hours, and they're hard to listen to, because it's my mom pleading, begging to talk to anyone that could help her. So she would call every day. "Please, can I talk to Ollie? Where is Lauren? I am her mother. This is not right. Bring her back. I won't press charges. Just bring her back." And phone call after phone call, they're saying, "No, no English. We don't speak English, only Arabic." They're speaking Arabic the whole time.
Mhm.
And so me listening to this, I'm thinking, use Google Translate. Well, Brian, there's no Google Translate in the 80s. I
Right,
mean,
correct.
like,
Would have
so
been
I just,
useful, I guess. Man, my gosh.
yeah. Yeah. So it was phone call after phone call, lying to my mom because, yes, he was there, and trying to get any kind of information of, is he going to bring me back? What is the plan? Finally, she does get on the phone with him, and he tells her, well, maybe you can come for a visit in a year. It's too soon. Things will be fine. Lauren's fine. You'll see, this is a good place for her to grow up. This is a safe place. Everything will be fine, Cathy. And so she knew he had no intentions of ever bringing me home. And so days and weeks of that desperation, not eating, not sleeping, everyone said, the police were like, this is out of our jurisdiction. We can't help you. The United States cannot get involved. I'm sorry, ma'am. We hear these stories all the time. The State Department had sent her a big envelope full of what to do when your child's been abducted. And she begins to call the support groups. She begins talking to people, grandparents, dads, moms, that have not seen their children in 3 years, 5 years, 6 years.
Ugh,
My mom was
that
just
can't
like,
be very comforting.
"No." I mean, that's the information she was getting. And
Right.
so, again, it was a total God thing. So Rick and Beverly had moved in with my mom at this point, and Miranda was like 3 or 4 years old. So they left their house, moved in with my mom. They were staying with her day and night, trying to get her to eat, trying to take care of her, answering the phones. And one day, Beverly was actually out and she called my mom. She was visiting her brother. And I have this on a cassette tape on a recording. She calls my mom, and my mom is hysterical crying. And my mom said, Cathy, please pray for protection over Lauren. Pray that wherever she is, that God would keep her safe. And Beverly starts praying over me. And then Beverly stopped and said, Cathy, you have got to get away from all of the noise and all of the chaos. And you've got to get away and you've got to pray. And my mom starts crying. She's like, you're right. I've got to get away. And I've got to stop smoking all these cigarettes, because she had smoked cigarettes since she was in high school. But at this point, she told me she was smoking like 2 cigarettes at a time all day
She
long.
just was stressed out.
Oh,
My
yeah.
gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, when I share this, I'm not saying that smoking's gonna make you go to hell,
No, no, right, no.
Um, and then Beverly said, she said, Cathy, I remember reading a book that the thing that brings you the closest to God is fasting. And my mom said, you're right. I need to fast and pray. And, um, and so she agreed that that's what she was going to do. But before that happened, Rick Lambert had gotten a meeting at the Dallas County Courthouse for my mom to meet with the grand jury. He had pulled some strings and got her an early appointment. And Rick said, look, Cathy, nothing really is going to probably happen with this, so don't get too excited. But the plan is, let's see if they can at least get a warrant out for Ollie's arrest. So if he comes back to the United States, they can arrest him and then hold him until we can get Lauren. And so my mom went he drove her to the courthouse that day. She went into the courtroom and stood before the grand jury, and she begins to tell her story of my dad taking me. And the jury said, I'm so sorry, ma'am. There's nothing we can do. We've heard these kind of stories before and our hands are tied. The United States does not have a treaty with Jordan. And then she just sort of broke
Mm,
down and she said, can I be honest with you right now? It's not fair that we spend billions of dollars in foreign aid every year and you're telling me you can do nothing to help me get my daughter back? Everybody on that panel shook their head and agreed with her. And one man stood up and opened his wallet and said, my name is El Zapanta. If you're not happy with, with the State Department, give me a call. I work for the State Department and I'll see what I can do for you. Well, Al Zapanta, he's still working to this day. He has many awards in the military. He works in the political realm. And, when you're in a place where you are so fearful and emotional, you can't even see the light in front of you.
mm.
That was my mom. She thanked Al. She put the, card in her wallet and she walked out. And when they got back to the townhouse, Beverly was like, well, how did it go? And my mom was like, they can't help me. So she grabbed her Bible and she grabbed her bag and she said, I don't know where I'm going. I'm going to get in the car. I'm going to go drive and just be alone. And Beverly said, don't worry, Cathy. We will handle all the phone calls on this end. Just go and be alone as long as you need to. So she got in a car and she drove to Fort Worth, Texas. She found some little motel room and she checked herself in. And Brian, she was there for 3 days and 3 nights. She didn't eat or drink. She was just praying for those 3 days. And she said on that third day, God gave her a Bible verse. She opened her Bible to Daniel 10:12. And it says, do not be afraid, Daniel. Since the first day you set your mind to gain understanding and to humble yourself before God, your words were heard. God was just saying, I see you, Cathy. I see you. From the moment you walked into this motel room and you started praying, your words were heard because you turned away from what you thought you could do on your own and you're running to me. And then she felt like God was showing her, Cathy, lay down those cigarettes because I need you to run to me and not to that. And if there's any area of your life that you're dealing with unforgiveness, you got to lay that at my feet too. Because the Bible talks about the prayers of the righteous, those prayers are heard and answered. And if you're dealing with unforgiveness and bitterness and anger, those prayers can be blocked. And that's what God was sort of showing my mom. And so I call it wrestling. I think we've all been there before where we don't want to give things up. And so she just sort of wrestled with God in that motel room. She left that motel room, and when she got back to the townhouse, Beverly opened the door, and I actually interviewed Bev and Rick on my podcast, and listening to Beverly tell this part of the story, she's like, I looked at your mom and just said, you're not the same. And my mom said, I'm not the same. God told me I'm going to get Lauren back, and I know that I'm going to. Brian, everything changed in my story after that. She opened up that wallet and she called Al. It was on a Monday. And Al began to tell my mom 1 week prior to him being the foreman at that jury duty, that grand jury, he was in Washington, D.C. having lunch with his friend Everett Alvarez. Well, Everett Alvarez is, I think, the second longest POW held. I think he was held for 8.5 years. He has a lot of awards, and I think many people know him in the military world. Everett was telling Al during this lunch meeting about a group of men that were in North Carolina. They were veterans, expertise in the Rangers and Green Beret and Delta Force. And their mission was to go to the Middle East and to rescue people that had been taken, more like adults, not children, and do private security and things like that. They had already done some security, but they were wanting to do more. And their company name was CTU. I mean, that was a week before him meeting my mom. You can't tell me that that's a coincidence. Just how everything lined up.
Yeah.
And so my mom said, I want to meet these men. Well, then Al was like, Cathy, hold on. One, the United States cannot help you. They are not working for the United States. They are, private citizens doing this on their own. Number one, you got to make sure you know that. Two, it's going to take a lot of money for them to pull off a rescue mission. And three, they've never rescued a child. And my mom said, I don't care. So Al said, okay, I will put you in contact with them. And I actually got to I have interviewed all of the men that did my rescue mission. I
Wow, that's
actually
awesome.
did, Brian, all because I started this podcast, all because I'm in the middle of writing a book. I get emotional because I said yes when God told me to share my story. I got to do a reunion with these men like 3 weeks ago. I haven't seen them since my rescue. I'm 43
Wow.
years old now. I
Wow.
got to hug their neck and tell them thank you. And to hear the story from them speaking it, not just from my memories. But anyways, so they came. My mom flew them to Dallas, and my mom went and met with Dave Chatelier and with Don Feeney. And when they talk about my mom, it's pretty amazing because they're like, yeah, she was emotional, but man, she was determined. One determined woman. She showed up
Mhm.
at the
She
hotel.
didn't stop, that's for sure.
She did not stop. She showed up with her binders of photos of me and photos of my dad, the photos she had taken when she was in Jordan 9 years prior to that, of, the ruins and Petra and all the areas that they had visited. She had folders of each of his family members, their names, what they did for a living, their characteristics, everything
Wow.
she could think of. She drew his family home by memory. Rick helped her find maps
Very
of
detailed.
Jerash. Very. As detailed, yes. And so they knew that she meant business. And so after meeting with her, they told her, Cathy, we've never rescued a child before, but this is a mission that we're willing to do. And that's what all of them said. They're like, we're fathers ourselves.
Mm.
How could we not say yes to you? And so they said yes. And Dave was the first one. He was the lead with the intelligence. He went into Jordan before anybody else. And his mission was to, one, find an escape route out of Jordan. You can't just put me on a plane and fly me out of there. try to get eyes on me to make sure I was actually there and to try to locate my dad's house. And
Mm.
when I interview him, he describes the details of all the different possibilities of how to get me out and why they wouldn't work. But what they had chosen was to go from Jordan into Israel over the Jordan River, the Allenby Bridge, which is a very secure border, but it was better than trying to go to Syria. He even thought about putting me on his back and swimming me across into Aqaba. But after he
Wow.
traveled all those places, he was like, that won't work. There's way too much security. Um, so he was able to scout out and figure out a way to get me out. And then with lots of other details and connections, Don shares how he had connections with the Rambo producers that did Rambo, one of the Rambo movies in Iron Eagle 3, I believe, or maybe it was Iron Eagle 2. They did security for them with Louis Gossett Jr.
Mm.
Well, another God thing, during my kidnapping, Iron Eagle was shooting in Israel with Louis Gossett Jr. and his family, and Don knew all of them. So they were able to use the movie as sort of a backdrop to why they were there and why we had to go back and forth between the borders, if that makes sense. So all these connections of making this mission possible. So Dave called and was like, I can't find Lauren. I can't find Ollie's house. I need help. So Don and JD went into Jordan and they start to spend time looking through the ruins, looking through the streets. And what they were saying is Jerish is a small town. My dad had a big family. They did not want to expose themselves. The longer they were in country, the more risk of being identified. And their visas were starting to run out.
Mm.
They would change rental cars every day to make sure that they had different cars, different clothing, trying not to be seen together in the streets. And after weeks of searching for me, JD and Dawn were together. They were about a couple feet away from each other. And JD just starts praying. He's like, look, God, I need you. Like, we've done all the things we know how to do. You've got to help us find this kid. Well, about that time, a couple minutes later, a bus pulls up and they had pictures of me. And I have olive complexion skin, I have darker hair, but I have bright eyes, bright blue eyes. I have my mom's eyes. And a school bus pulls up right where JD is standing on the street. And he turns and looks through the window of the school bus. And he said, I turned and I just locked eyes with him. And he got so excited, he ran over to Dawn and he grabbed Dawn by the shoulders and starts shaking Dawn. And Dawn's like, what's wrong? And JD said, I spotted Lauren. She's on that bus. And Dawn was like, what do you mean? How do you know it's Lauren? And he was like, what do you mean? It's her eyes. I saw her eyes on that bus. Well, about that time, the bus starts driving off and they tried to jump in the car and to follow the bus, but the streets are really crowded, like with tables and people and donkey carts, and it's real windy and tight, narrow roads. So they lost the bus. But that was the first time that they actually knew I was there because there were times that they thought maybe I was in Lebanon. So they contacted my mom. My mom at this point was in Cyprus waiting on the phone call to know what was going on. And they said, Cathy, we have spotted Lauren. Dave's figured out an escape route, but we can't find Ollie's home. Nothing here looks the same in your photos. You're going to have to come and help us. So my mom was in Cyprus with another one of the men. His name is Jim Hatfield. And Jim got my mom to the airport to fly her into Amman. And then Dave and Dawn and JD met her at the airport. And she was hair covered in disguise. And Brian, she was excited. She was very confident that she was going to go into Jerash and know exactly where to go. She was also excited because this is the closest she had been to me in months. And so it was just that more, opportunity of being able to get me back. And as they began to drive into Jerash, her heart just sort of fell on her chest and fear began to come over her because nothing looked the same. The dirt roads were now paved. The small buildings were now big. It's like the way I describe it, what I remember is like apartments. They build one building on top of the other on top of the other. And nothing looked the same. she couldn't remember where my dad's house was. And so Don was like, "It's okay, Cathy. We're just going to start zigzagging the town." And so he began zigzagging up and down the streets. And after a period of time, my mom just got down in the floorboard of that car, put her head down in the seat, and began praying and crying out loud. And she was like, "God, you have not brought me and these men this far to not even find Ollie's home. You have to help us find the home."
Mm.
With her eyes closed, it's like the Holy Spirit was just showing her where she had walked all those years before. She said after dinner every night, her and my aunts would walk the streets to the marketplace. She began remembering walking the streets, the different turns in the road, how the hills went up and down. And she began to say, "Turn left and go straight and turn right." And then she looked up out her window and she saw my dad's car sitting on the street with Texas license plates because he had the car shipped from the United States. At that moment, Brian, she froze.
Mm.
And finally, when she could speak, she said, "Don, I saw Ollie's car." So Don said, "Hide your face." And when he looked back, he saw my dad walk out of the building just long enough to catch his, to see him. And then he walked back in. So that was the first time they finally spotted my dad and his house. But again, nothing happened until my mom began praying and until JD was praying. It's like God was just in every step of the details. So now they had to figure out what to do. They found me, they found the home. They realized it wasn't a good idea to take me out of the house because the house was located right near a police station and in a crowded town. So they started following the bus and they would watch the bus to see where it went. And there was one farmhouse that was out on the outskirts of town. And they figured that would be the safest place to get me, would be off that bus. Well, I told my mom later that the kids that lived in that house had just started going to school there a few weeks before this whole rescue mission happened.
Mm.
The code word for the day of the mission, Judy Feeney is married to Don, and Judy was helping from North Carolina at the offices in CTU. She was coordinating everything, and they wanted to be careful not to say too much over the phone lines. So Judy came up with a code word, and she said, "Tell Cathy the day of the mission, if everything is a go and everything is working the way it's supposed to, the word is the sun is shining." But the sun is SON, not SUN.
Mm.
And of course, my mom just started crying. She's like, "Yes, the sun is Jesus. The sun is shining." So one of the men, their job, I believe it was Dave. His job was to watch the house to make sure I actually got on the bus that day because you don't want to do a hijack the bus and the kid's not on it for whatever reason.
Yeah, no. Scare the rest of the kids for no reason.
Yeah, Lauren stayed home sick that day.
Uh,
So he saw me get on the bus, and so he drove to where Don and JD and my mom were waiting, and he told them, "Lauren's on the bus, the mission's a go." So after the bus passed Don pulled his car behind the bus to block the bus in. Don got out and went over to the driver's side door and was speaking English to distract the bus driver. JD went over to the accordion style doors on the passenger side and he was trying to pry his way onto the bus. And then my mom went over and she spotted me and she tapped on the window. And there's not a lot that I remember, Brian, but I remember locking eyes with my mom through that window. All I could think of is it looks just like my mom, but how can it be? She's all the way in Texas. That can't be her. And I froze. I froze. And the men had already prepared my mom that I might go into shock and all the things that could happen. Well, they were right. I didn't budge. And she's tapping on my window and she's sort of motioning to me. And so she had to, push past JD. She got on the bus. She's walking past all the kids. She scoops me up into her arms and grabs my backpack. And as she's stepping off the bus, there's a lady chaperone, and the lady chaperone jumps on my mom's back. And so my mom turns around and punches the lady in the nose. And so the lady's bleeding. Now I'm really freaking out. And JD got the keys out of the ignition and he threw them in some bushes, hoping that the bus driver would go looking for the keys and not go straight to the police. And then they go and help my mom get me into the car and get my mom into the car. And they hide me under some blankets in the floorboard of the back seat. And we all jump in the car and start to speed off. Well, Dave meets us a couple blocks away and we switch cars. So now Dave has the car that we hijacked the bus with, and now we're in a totally different car. And we start to head towards the border of Israel. Now, before this happened, my mom had made reservations for us to fly out of Amman back to the United States, hoping that they would go looking for us there.
Mm.
Dave had the scariest or most risky job. He took that car that we just hijacked the bus with and he drove back towards the city to be a decoy. And it worked, Brian, because they pulled him
Wow.
over. His car was stopped in the middle of the road, backing up traffic. He was surrounded by Jordanian military. They pulled him out. They tore his car apart, looking through the trunk, looking through everything for any kind of ID of me. They brought the bus driver to him, and the bus driver speaking Arabic and pointing to the car and saying, "Yes, that's the car." And then he's pointing to Dave, but he's like, "I don't know who that guy is," because Dave wasn't there at the hijacking. The only thing Dave had in his car was a Snickers bar, and I told you I saw him at that reunion. Can you see that writing?
Oh yeah, yeah.
He had this in his car. 37 years old, Pepsi. And he gave it to me when I saw him in North Carolina not that long ago.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's
that's all
amazing.
he had. It's amazing. I mean, when he gave me that, I lost it. But so he's being interrogated for 30, 40 minutes on the side of the road. And just, he's speaking English. He's asking, like, where can he go fishing? Where's the best place to see the ruins? Just acting like a tourist. And all of a sudden, on the walkie-talkies, on the radios, he hears Alia Airport, Alia Airport. Brian, they left Dave on the side of the road. They all jumped in their cars and they headed to the airport looking for me. They shut down the whole airport looking for me. And because of that, Dave was able to get away. And he tells his whole story as well and lots more details of how he got out.
Yeah, that's good. That's, I mean, he could have really been there to this day. I
Yes,
mean, or killed either way.
yes, yes. He's 85 years old and he has kids and grandkids and has a farm and he's
It's amazing.
living life.
That's awesome.
Um, so while that was going on, we started driving towards Israel. And the fog was so thick that day, you could only see the front of the cars, how thick it was. I think it's like valleys that you have to go through to drive towards the border. And along, there's people that are living in refugee tents along the road. So we pull over, we're changing out of our clothes, out of my school uniform, and JD hands out all the clothes to the people living in the tents. My mom is just holding me in the back seat and she's praying and praying because we know that we could get pulled over any minute, right? And while Dawn is driving, my mom looks out the window and she's like, "What is that bright light in the distance? Like, what is that?" Because that's all she could see was some light through the fog. And Dawn was like, "Well, Cathy, that's Israel. The sun is shining over Israel." Well, for my mom, like, it's just that's what she needed to hear. Jesus is the sun. The code word is the sun is shining. And the only sun my mom could see was over Israel, where we were going to escape. So we get to the border, and the border is very secure. The high fences, barbed wire fences, the big shacks with the soldiers and machine guns, and JD and Dawn, well, all of them actually, they had been through these borders numerous times. They knew every inch of it, but still, what were they going to do if they realized who we were going through that border? We had to leave our car. Back then, you couldn't just drive over. You have to leave your car on one side. You give all your paperwork to the soldiers and the bus driver. You get on the bus and you wait and wait and wait. I think we waited on that bus 30 minutes for them to check our paperwork, for the bus driver to stop eating lunch. And finally, they get on the bus, and you can imagine how terrified my mom was and trying to keep it together. And they get on the bus, and the way it was back then is a Jordanian bus driver and soldier would drive you all the way to the middle of the border, and then there was a shack in the middle, and they would switch, and an Israeli soldier and bus driver would switch and take you on over into Israel.
Hmm.
Right as we got to the middle and they switched, right as we were crossing over that border, there was a big commotion where we had just left. They had just realized that we weren't at the airport, but we were at that border. But by this time, Brian, it was too late. We had already crossed over into Israel, and there's nothing they could do.
Mm.
We got off the steps, we got off that bus, and my mom lost it. I'm crying. She is hugging me. And there's a group of women that are watching, and they look at JD, and JD is this big, handsome military guy. And they're like, hey, what's going on with that woman? Is the little girl okay? And JD looks at them, and he's crying. He's got tears coming down his face. And he's like, you see that woman and that little girl? That little girl was gone for 3 months. She is an American citizen, and her father just kidnapped her, and we just brought her home. We just got her home to safety. Well, those women start jumping up and down, and they're like, we have come to the Holy Land, and we have seen a miracle. And they come over, and they pray with us, and they hug us. And Brian, it's like even at the border, God was like, I've got you. Like, I've got people on the other side that are waiting for you. And it was just a big celebration. That night, Don, you have to listen to his interview. Don said that Louis Gossett Jr. came over to him and put a big old a hand on his shoulder and was like, hey, when are you going to introduce me to this mom and this little girl that you just rescued using my movie as your cover? And Don was like, I didn't want to get you in trouble in case we were captured, but yeah, you can meet them now that everything went well.
Hmm. It's too crazy.
It's
Wow.
amazing.
Yeah, that's quite the story. So you were over there a total of 3 months before they were able to get you back. I mean, your mom obviously from the time she
Yeah.
found you on that plane, she wasn't going to stop because I mean 3 months
Yeah.
is pretty quick. I
Very
mean, that could
fast.
you could have been there for years.
Mhm.
I mean, there's some people that just don't make it back either way. So your mom definitely didn't stop. Now, I got to imagine too, hearing all the recordings back now, how much crazier it is for you probably now that you're older. You you've been through life. There's so many things. Now you hear your mom. I got to imagine that's got to be a whole different thing for you. And I mean, you were how old when this all went down?
I was 7, and Brian, I have to share with you, I have 2 boys. I have a 12 and a 14-year-old, and, I started listening to these tapes last Christmas. My oldest son couldn't handle it. He was like,
Mm.
"Mom, like, can you turn that down? I can't hear Mimi crying like that." It was gut-wrenching. It was hard to hear. It was hard for me. I would listen, and I'm like, "I gotta take a minute." And I would listen, and I'm like, "I can't believe what my mom went through." And like you said, now me being a mom, it's hard to listen to, but then I'm like, God, you are so good, and you are so powerful." And yeah, 3 months, but in that 3-month time period, when my mom got me back, I was speaking Arabic. I was already like, I was going
They
to the
really,
mosque and
yeah, they got
praying.
you quick, huh?
It is, shocking, to be honest. I was listening to one of my cassette tapes of me talking to my mom when I was in Jordan, and I was very guarded, my emotions, I didn't even recognize me. I was always already speaking with an accent. Um, so yeah, children that have been taken for years, I can't imagine what those parents feel like.
And the other hard part I gotta imagine is you love both your parents, right? You're a little
Mhm.
kid. You don't know that there's some, parent struggle going on here. You're
Right.
just, we're little kids. We go with the flow, or, and we
Mhm.
feel secure with our parents.
Mhm.
I imagine that that there had to be an effect with you too, with separating from your father now, right? And here you were, you were over there in that country. They obviously got a hold of you really quick, probably brainwashed you really quick, and then you were sitting here. There's probably a part of you wondering, like, why am I going with my mom? You know what? Where's my dad? You know, I know that there's as a little kid. There's
Sure.
got to be a lot of questions going through your head.
Brian, I'm glad you said that because the reason I'm writing my book and I'm sharing my story, for me personally, being rescued, coming into Israel, is the beginning of my story. When I hit middle school and it was hard, I lived with so many years of anger and bitterness and hurt. Why didn't I know my father? When my father took me, he ruined my relationship with him. How can you be a good dad? And even like obviously I believe I'm a Christian. And so I'm like, God, how can you be a good father if you even allowed my dad to take me? Yes, it's really amazing that you did this miracle, but you could have prevented the whole thing. So there's so many emotions of not being raised with my biological father, not knowing him, not knowing my stepmother and my siblings. When he did this, he took that whole family from me. For so many years, I wanted to know that side of my family. Um, and I had opportunity to see my dad, and I've seen my siblings, and I'm able to talk to them now, but it's never going to be the same because I'm like, I want to know who I look like and all those things that a child goes through, and who's going to walk me down the aisle, who's going to be there when I have my children. And my mom remarried, and I had an amazing stepfather, but it was years of having to learn how to forgive my dad for
And be
breaking that
okay with, I
trust.
guess, not having like every question answered, right? Because
Mhm.
there's a lot of questions there that you may never actually have the complete answer to or
That's
find the
right.
resolution to, you know. So I
That's
gotta
right.
imagine that's a whole other thing that you've had to kind of come to grips with as well.
That's right, and we had to change my last name. We had to live in hiding. By the time I was in high school, I'd already moved 14 times. I didn't have
Wow.
a normal childhood,
Right.
and I talk a lot about all of that in my book. And the reason why is I'm like, I always say you don't have to be kidnapped or have a child kidnapped to know the hurt of maybe a divorce or a loss or a tragedy. It all hurts the same,
Sure.
and to walk through that journey of healing, it starts with forgiving. I had to forgive my dad, even if he never asked for forgiveness. I had to learn that forgiving doesn't mean what he did is okay. Forgiving doesn't mean to forget, because why would I be sharing my story with you today? Forgiving is I'm laying it down at the feet of Jesus because it's for God to deal with and not for me. And when I could let that go, that's when my healing could begin and my heart could be healed and not so bitter and angry.
Yeah, because I mean, I gotta imagine too, was there hesitation to tell your sons about this whole situation? I mean, have you told them about it completely? Was that something that you always kind of had to toss with, like, how far do you want to tell your story, so to speak?
No, now when they got old enough, because there's a movie, and so when they were old enough to understand, we actually watched the movie together and they've asked me questions. And now what's really cool, Brian, because I work full time and I'm a mom and we do soccer and all the things. I don't wanna take time away from my family. And the best gift is when my oldest son looked at me and said, "Mom, you're doing a good thing. You're telling people what God did in your life, and you're sharing your story to help others. It's fine. Go do your thing." That's encouraging to me, Brian, because he sees that I'm trying to do something to help others. Um, so they know my whole story, but I've never badmouthed my dad. It's just I'm like,
Sure.
I think he took me, I truly believe, because he thought he was doing the right thing in his religion and his beliefs. It wasn't to hurt me. It wasn't, even though it did. And honestly, I know because it ruined our relationship. So it's probably, I'm assuming, a big regret on his part. Um, some decisions we make, it's you can't overcome them.
Yeah, that's 100% true. The decisions we can make, there's consequences to them. Sometimes there's rewards to them. I mean, every decision has its own outcome, right? So,
Mhm.
um, Wow. Well, it's amazing that you've been able to find a way to take a negative and kind of turn it into a positive, right? And
Mhm.
that's the best thing because through your story, there's a lot of different things that you've had to overcome throughout life in general. So and that goes to everybody in general. We're all going through stuff in our life and we have to find that way to get through it and adapt and overcome, right? And so
Mhm.
it's amazing that you're able to, like I said, take this and turn it into something and make it more into a positive. And I really appreciate you coming out and talking and telling your story. It is a very unique story. Is there anything in that you didn't get to share with us that you might have forgot?
The biggest thing, especially Veterans Day, it is an honor. It's an honor to be on your show. It's an honor to say thank you. I mean, what if these men didn't say yes? They risked their lives for me. They left their families, they left their own children, and, for me to go back and tell them thank you in person and to tell their families thank you and to say, "Hey, I'm now a mom and I am a wife," and to show them pictures of my family, and it's just amazing. And so if it wasn't for men and women, like you and people that serve in the military with their expertise to put their life on the line, I don't know if I'd be here doing this podcast with you today. I don't know what my life would look like. So, the biggest thing I want to say is thank you so much for all the things that you guys do because I know y'all have risked a lot um, for the people in the United States. So, thank you so much.
Well, and thank you for all the support and the kind words. And you're right. Um, it was a selfless act for someone to go in there and to put their life on the line for people they didn't know, right?
Yep.
And um, they heard a mom plead for for her daughter. So um, it's just amazing. And your mom too, just with her perseverance. I
Hmm.
mean, she wasn't going to take no for an answer, anyways. So even if those guys would have been no, there would have been someone else.
Yeah.
From the sounds of your mom, she wasn't gonna stop until she got you back home.
Oh, yeah.
And
Rick
and and
Rick
I
was
mean,
already trying, like, so I interviewed Rick and Beverly, and Rick had this whole plan how him and his buddies were gonna go, and Beverly's like, "I'm so glad that didn't happen." I was like, "Yeah." I
yeah,
mean,
because I mean, things could have went completely the other way, and in so
mhm.
many different ways. It could have been a botched, go at it. They could have got caught. You could have been stuck there. Um, you know, your mom could have been in trouble. I mean,
Oh,
there's
yeah.
just so many other negative ways it could have turned out if God wasn't on your guys' side, if
Yeah.
you know, amazing people, everything, fell the way that it did and it was all meant to happen. And here you are able to speak and talk all about it, and that's amazing. It's crazy too because do recall that movie as
Mhm.
I think I was about a teenager when it came out. You and I are the same age, so
Yeah. We were
um
teenagers. I thought it was
yeah,
super cool to have a movie. I was, like, 13, I think.
yeah. Now it's just crazy to actually have you on the podcast and now hearing the story, and it's all like coming back to me. I'm like, wow, that was a really big story
Yeah.
back in the day. And wow, like I said, it's just amazing your mom, how because the way I look at it too is 3 months is a long time. And I mean, every day longer that you could have stood over there could have, made it that much harder for you to get back
Oh, yeah.
and, and want to come back,
Right.
and that's the other thing is you could have fought the whole thing too and said, no, I don't want to go. I want to stay here with my dad,
Oh, yeah. You're right.
you
Especially
could have,
listening to some of those cassette tapes, that was, it was disturbing and hard to listen to, but you're absolutely right, and like you said, it's, bef nothing happened unless my mom prayed. And when God intervened, that's how all the dominoes started to stack up. And that's why I'm sharing my story. And on my website, laurenburns.net, there's all the episodes of all the men that I interview, which is just the coolest thing to me to be able to share that. And there's a newsletter that I just share scripture verses and inspiring things, especially for people that are going through hard stuff. Finding forgiveness, how to heal, how to move on, and then how to turn your story around to encourage other people.
Well, it's good, because I feel like our generation of the kids that grew up in the 80s,
Yeah,
90s, uh, we grew up with a different kind of, parents, and we had a lot of uh, parental trauma and all that stuff. So, talking about it nowadays and having outlets and hearing other people talk about things, it just makes it so much more comfortable and easier for everybody else. So, hopefully, we can hand over to the next generation a lot better mentally sound folks. You know
yeah.
what I mean? Or or worse. I don't know. Sheesh.
No, better. I like the better
Yeah.
part.
Yeah.
Let's go with that.
Yeah, let's go better. I like that too. But is there anything else you want to say before we head out? Like I said, I appreciate you coming on, take the time, telling your story. It's a very amazing story, and it's also a story of just not quitting and taking on your life and taking lemon and making your lemonade out of it. You know what I mean?
That's right. I figure you would like this. The Rambo mom
Ooh, I love
saves.
that.
Do you love that? My mom loves
Wow.
that. She's Rambo mom. Commando mom grabs girl. These are some
Yes,
old
let's
news
see all
articles.
these. That's so wow.
Isn't that cool?
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
That is
thank you
absolutely
so
crazy.
much for having me on. And again, I feel pretty honored to be on your show on Veterans Day. So thank you, Brian, for this opportunity.
Well, thank you, and hope you have an amazing day and amazing week out there. And if you ever need anything, please reach out. And always here for anybody that needs someone to talk to or anything like that. Or if you want to come back on the show again and tell more of your story, it's always here too. Or maybe you want to highlight something. Now you are writing a book, right? Now when is your
I
book coming
am.
out?
That's a great question. That is a
We're gonna
process. I'm
put some
learning all
pressure
kinds of
on you
things.
now. We got
Yeah.
it on the recording. So when are you gonna drop it?
Yeah. I would have it done next week. My husband's like, slow down. But no, I would love to come back on when we get that out.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, cool. All right, well, thanks again, and we'll see you next time.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, friends and fam. Well, that is gonna wrap up season 2. My gosh, can you guys believe it? 105 episodes. It's been amazing, and we've had some amazing guests. This is a great opportunity for you guys all to go back, check out all the different interviews that we had from season 1 and season 2. Don't get yourself too behind, because January 9th of 2023, we're going to hit the ground running. We're going to be right back at it. I'm also going to be including some solo episodes where I'm going to do a couple veteran related type episodes. And once again, we'll be right back on to some amazing interviews with some amazing folks. You guys, thank you so much for all the support, all the love. Hope you guys have an amazing day. You know how we say it on the show. Don't let the day kick your ass. Make sure you're out there kicking in. Till next time, we'll see you guys. Arr.